Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining Snowflake Office Hours. Today we are joined with Iovation, a company dedicated to spotting and stopping fraud attempts, as well as making customer authentication easy and powerful. I have the pleasure of speaking with Kirk Spenlove, VP of Engineering at Iovation. Snowflake was engaged with Iovation as they were looking for alternatives to their on-prem data warehouse. One thing to note is that being able to handle JSON data as a first-class data citizen was key. And my name is Jeannie Liu. I'm a product marketing manager here at Snowflake. As you may already know, office hours are designed for attendees to hear directly from customers about their data warehousing journey, and more importantly, get your questions answered. 3 quick items. If you have any tech difficulties, please chat us in the console. The second is we will hold all questions until the end, but please type them in throughout the duration of the presentation. And finally, the slide deck and recording will be made available upon completion of this session. Kirk, we have a packed house in here, so let's get started, shall we?
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. As said, my name is Kirk Spenlove. I'm the Vice President of Engineering here at Iovation. Iovation is a software company. We're based out of Portland, Oregon, and last year TransUnion was impressed enough with us that in addition to being a customer, they went ahead and bought us as a company. So we've got all sorts of exciting things going on with our big brother as well. But Snowflake. So just a little bit about the company. And that is, one of our key differentiators is what we call connections, or a network graph, or all sorts of names depending on the salesman that you hear talk about it or the technical person that you hear present about it. But it really is about differentiating between the good folks and the bad folks. And so when I'm asking an elevator what we do, it's I help customers understand who the good people are so that you can make life as easy on them as possible, and who the bad people are so that you can make life on them as hard as possible. And so we do that with a variety of ways. Within the engineering department, I also have a data scientist team of several data scientists that use Snowflake and other tools quite heavily to look at the data that we have. And so that's a little bit about Iovation. We have multiple product lines that we give very creative names to, and then some that are not so creative. But if you're curious about that, we're more than willing to talk to you about how we can help. But if we look at what was going on with Iovation and the data that we had, we were in a scenario where there were things that it was very hard to do. We were running on an Oracle system, and at some point it got to be where we were going to be paying almost as much in license fees to Oracle as we were making, so that didn't seem to be sustainable. We switched to open source systems for our real-time system, and that worked out very well, but it made it really hard for the data scientists on the back end to walk through it. And so that was part of the technical environment that I stepped into to help build the analytics team. There was several pain points that came up, all the way from with Postgres, we got to where we couldn't scale it large enough on a single server, and so scaling horizontally was hard there. We tried things like Vertica, which worked really well from a technical standpoint until we had enough data in there that the bills starting to get to be more expensive than we were willing to do. And then one of the other points that we had is all of the data that was coming through our systems ended up in these JSON log files. And so that gave great flexibility to the real-time side of the house, because they could put things in and not have to worry about having a DBA fix it on the other end. But it drove my DBAs crazy trying to keep up with schema changes and whatnot. So all of those things we were looking at to try to figure out what we could do better, and that's where we started looking at Snowflake. So just as an example, so we are a software as a services company, which means that as transactions flow through our customers' systems, they send them to us for decisioning and for information. And so they will send us information that we capture about the device, information about the transaction, and those types of things. And within about 100 to 150 milliseconds, we will send back an answer to them. We capture and track all of that data that flows through our system. And a good problem to have is that we are a growing company, and we are adding subscribers. We are currently running somewhere around 35 to 40 million transactions a day through our systems. And so in addition to that type of growth, as the real-time services are put together and around like device attributes and whatnot, there's more and more information that we can capture. And so in addition to like the number of rows, the size of each row is also growing. And so that we needed something that could handle that kind of growth and that could handle spikes in transactions, as well as demand in the ability to look at data. And so as we went through things, we started to look at at different options. So as I mentioned, because these are all stored in large log files out on our Unix servers, one of the early things that we did was just do parallel greps and JQ, if anyone is familiar with those command line tools. And it is quite surprising what people can do, how creative they can be given those kinds of constraints. And so I have several of our data scientists, algorithms and whatnot. They would sometimes take 3 or 4 or 5 days to run, but we could get the information out. But that quickly, turned into something that doesn't really work. And so, Oracle was, as I mentioned, it got to be very expensive for us, and so we wanted to get off of that. Postgres being the open source system that worked for a number of months, maybe a year or two, until we couldn't put it on a big enough system to handle the year's worth or 2 years worth of data that my data scientists wanted to go after. And then Vertica was the next thing that we tried. And in all of these, except for the first one with parallel grep and JQ, we had to put it in structured data. So it required DBAs to manage it. It required people to run and patch the systems that it was running on, to replace them after after their life cycle was done, and all of those things. And so we were really looking for something that would let us get out of some of those restrictions, those constraints, and allow us the flexibility to go forward. And so as we learned a little bit about Snowflake, this was very early on. They were a much smaller company, as were we, but they gave us access and said, just try it over the weekend. Let's see what you can do. And so we loaded up like 3 or 4 months worth of data in raw JSON format over the course of a couple days, and then learned the syntax that Snowflake supports for querying that data out. And over that first weekend, we were able to answer a couple of questions that we really were hard pressed to answer using any of our other tools. So that's when we discovered that, we think we've got something here that will work. And so for us, the main data use, the main use case for Snowflake is querying that raw JSON data out of Snowflake. So people talk about ETL tools. We basically have a L tool. We take the log files that are dumped out of our systems and basically just load them in. And from there, as people need things, then they're able to use JSON, the query syntax to pull out what they need. And so one of the other pieces, because we do carry information, we don't carry credit card information or that type of thing, but it's very important and very private information. So we wanted to make sure that we were secure, that we were not putting it out somewhere that data would get out into the wild. And so the security aspects, the encryption at rest and encryption in transit, and all of the things that Snowflake has was a very useful thing for us. I should also mention that Snowflake was one of the first things that we did that was not on-site, on-prem, under our control, and so that took a while to walk through the processes that we need to vet that out. And I wanted this, to be accessible to the entire team, so that I didn't have to worry about if I had, 10 people accessing it or 40 people accessing it. I didn't have to worry about congestion there. And so, and then as I said earlier, the bottom line is that we were able to get results. After we'd loaded up 5 years worth of data, my data science team was able to gain insights that they just literally were not able to do before with a single query across all of those 5 years. And so that for us was all part of the selection process. Did it really live up to the hype? Did it live up to the claims? And in our case, we found that it did. And so now we talk about, so what are we thinking about now? So today I have somewhere around, I have a little over 500 terabytes worth of data in Snowflake. We are currently on our reporting system, which still runs under Postgres. We've sharded it out so that some of our larger customers, that's all that's on a single Postgres box. So we're in the midst of migrating that structured data over to Snowflake so that we don't have to maintain what today is a 6, 12, 18, an 18-node cluster of some of the largest servers we can buy to handle the Postgres load. And so we're migrating that over to a Snowflake instance, and it will be our first time of going after data, in a structured format, and we're looking forward to that. We've also started data sharing with our parent company. There have been things where we have joint customers. They wanted access to data. It was very easy to start doing that, and we've had several of our customers inquire about that as well. And so data sharing both within and without the company is something that we feel like Snowflake excels at. And so, as I look at Snowflake, it really is this scalable, usable, secure repository of data. And I'll let you read the slide there, but I don't have to worry about, how can I, or even can I answer that question. It's more about getting data in and then using it. So I still have to answer the question sometimes of how am I going to pay for all of the additional usage that comes out of it. But that's a business problem that I'll take over the technical problem of not being able to do it pretty much any day. So. All right, so that is that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Great, Kirk. That's been super helpful, and I love all the insights. So there are two things in particular that I found really useful, and I'll also go through the questions that have come in. So the first thing you mentioned was Snowflake was one of the first products that was not an on-prem solution. So it took a while for your team to get fully on board, and that just speaks to the vetting process that you guys did, but more importantly, how Snowflake met all those needs. So let's dive into that in a little bit. And the second was, Snowflake actually did live up to the hype. So you talked about getting the data science team all the information they needed. They were able to see insights, draw insights from over the past 5 years. So that's just really fulfilling to see. Okay, so more important things, which is questions from all you guys. The first question was, you talked about the selection process. In particular, you looked at Postgres. So I think you mentioned that there were 2 years worth of data, and the question the audience member had was, were your scaling issues with Postgres tied to the actual cloud provider?
So we are, except for things like Snowflake, we are completely an open source shop. So we tried Postgres for the real-time systems first, and it just did not scale well for us, and so we converted to Cassandra for the real-time side. That left the reporting side still under Postgres, and at first it worked okay. And what we found, though, is that after we have one customer, for instance, who sends us probably 6 or 7 million transactions a day. We ended up sharding out the system. Our term, probably not the official term, but we put several customers on each Postgres server, and it came to that single customer took an entire server. And we could only keep 180 so 6 months to a year's worth of data. My data science team wanted to be able to see 2 years or 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. And then they also, when they ran their queries, it would slow down, our production reporting system because it was on the same system. So it was, that's the type of constraints that we ran into. So we didn't buy the Postgres from anyone, and we didn't go into some of the other things like perhaps I'm trying to remember now, Greenplum and some of the other ones that allow you to horizontally scale. We didn't feel like we wanted to get into that niche market and then have DBAs to support that side. So it probably technically could have scaled further than we took it, but we were looking for, out of the box without too much. Hopefully that answers the question.
Great, Kirk. Thank you. And then you mentioned that you have 500 terabytes of data. What are you doing to load that in? Are you using any real-time, neo real-time, or real-time tools? What does the environment look like for you for the loading of data in particular?
Sure. So keep in mind that we were a customer well before, tools like, Snowpipe and those kinds of things were around. So we wrote our own, as we tend to do here. And so it is written in, probably in Java, since I know the developer who wrote it, and we call it Snowblower. I don't know whether we've trademarked that or not, but if Snowflake is interested, let me know. And so we have our own system that loads it in, and today most of the data, the bulk of the data that we load in, is not real time. The data scientists, if they get it an hour later, they're okay with that. We're not looking at real time, and so most of the data comes from those log files, and so in essence we're basically taking log files and loading them in as the JSON along with some metadata around each transaction. And so we've written our own for that. We do have some things that come in a more real-time flow off of queues, and so we have a mixture of both. But the vast majority of that 500 terabytes is loaded in using that that homegrown system to load the log files in.
That's great. That Snowblower, I've got to make use of that. So thank you for sharing. Let's go into cost. I know you mentioned towards the end of the presentation where you're happy to tackle these business problems rather than the technical challenges that you may face. So what are some measures that you're taking to actually control costs with Snowflake?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're probably rudimentary in what we do because we still think of ourselves as a small company. So the major users of Snowflake today are my data science team, and then the rest of engineering, and then over on the client's customer success side of the house, they have some business intelligence type analysts. And so we have set up different names for the data warehouses that they use. And so it's very rudimentary in that we, every month we take a look at how many credits have been used on the compute side of the house. We tend to talk a lot internally and say, okay, I'm querying this type of data. Does anybody have any better ways to do it? And so a lot of talk internally. So pretty informal at this point, and then trying to plan for the future and being able to map out what we need. And then success breeds success. Kind of the professional services, the business intelligence arm of the company has done so well, and customers have really liked what they're seeing out of it, and so we're planning on increasing that staff 3x what it is today, which is going to lead to a corresponding increase in Snowflake costs. But and so not a brilliant answer, but we just keep an eye on things and chat with people about the queries that they're running. We take a look at expensive queries and make sure that that we're using it most effectively.
That's great, Kirk. Yep. Thank you for shedding that insight. So related to this, let's talk about the warehouses and how you're spinning them up. Are you using multiple warehouses? What are you using them for? So let's just get a lay of the land of your environment and how you're actually able to ingest all this data, do analytics on this data, and then give this analysis to your data scientists.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So one of the strengths that I feel like Iovation brings to the table is we have very good technical folks, and so we are running on the AWS instance of Snowflake, not the Azure one, and we happen to have very fast pipes between us and AWS, and so loading the data in it really is a matter of almost just copying the files over and then running that single copy command with some metadata around it. And because we have fat pipes between us and AWS, it loads very, very quickly. And so once it gets up into that, up into the Snowflake system, as I described, each user of Snowflake has, they're associated with a role that then has access to specific data warehouses. In order to make it easier for people, we've actually come up with naming conventions that share how big the warehouse is, and so that people can say, oh, okay, I'm going after 2 years worth of data. A 3XL is probably a good size to use, and so they can, on their drop-down list, they can pick one that has 3XL in the name, and then they go use that. We also have a Slack channel where we announce when we're running things like that. And if several folks are going after the same subset of data, the same month or the same year or the same 2 years, depending on what they're going after, then they can hop on and on that same data warehouse and use it. And so if you look at the number of data warehouses that we have, it's probably extreme. We probably don't need that many, and so it looks like someone who has used this system for a long time, and it has grown considerably from where it was. And so as we are migrating to the new environment with the reporting system and whatnot, we're trying to make that a little more sane. But the good news is it has the flexibility to go either route. And so that's sort of the lay of the land. And then people will also, one of the other techniques that we use is this JSON blob is, it's a huge amount of data, and so if you know that you're going to be doing a a lot of further querying on it. You go in and parse out of that JSON blob just the data that you need, and then store that into your own table or an intermediate table, and then you can scale the warehouse back down to a much smaller system and run against that. And then as far as my data science team, they connect. Sometimes it really is the queries, and so using the web-based client is something that they use heavily. There's also ODBC and JDBC connections. Since we're mostly a Linux shop here, we use mostly the JDBC side of things, but they have Python and R and several other things connected via those, as well as clients, things like Tableau or something like that as well. So did I cover everything or not?
Yeah, we talked about the connection, you talked about the actual ingestion of data, you talked about the number of warehouses, or you talked about the environment in general and the size, so that's great. One thing that I wanted to also ask here was, there was a question around basically security. So obviously Iovation being in the business of securing individuals, one of the things that you need as a company is also security. So we talked about encryption at rest and encryption at transit. So talk to us a little bit more about the functionality of Snowflake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when we first started out looking at it, right? My network architect, he wanted to make sure that all of that was good, right? My data architect wanted to go through and understand, the underlying data structures and how they secured that. And then because we are a global company, we also have a data protection officer in the EU, and so from a GDPR perspective, we had to walk through all of those things as well. So we, as I said, we don't carry credit card data, and so we don't need to be, the PCI compliance side of things. We do model a lot of what we do after some of the PCI, DSS requirements, and so this would have fit into there. And then we don't store health care data either, so we didn't have to go after the HIPAA compliant things. But knowing that all of those things were there was definitely a positive when when each one of the different groups looked through the system to verify that it meets our needs. It can be as secure or perhaps even a little more secure than what we would do internally. And so now that I've said all that, I'm not sure I answered the question. I hope so.
So long as it met your security standards and that bar, especially for a company like yours, that speaks volumes. So let's shift gears a little bit here. This question in particular was talking about basically the limitations. So what are one or two limitations you observed with Snowflake?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it has not been perfect. There have been times that we have been trying to do very complex queries on 5 years worth of data, and we will get to the end of it, and we will get an error that says unable to complete. Please correct and retry. The error messages have been getting better, but that is something that periodically, with the massive amounts of data that we've got, we have run into those. Beyond that, you can do very stupid things with Snowflake, and it will do it. We had one person early on that said, "Oh, well, I wonder how many rows are in the table." Instead of asking somebody, they did a select count star from, at that time it was about 300 terabytes, and it cost us a few $1,000s to do that. So limitation is it doesn't protect you from doing silly things. So. But beyond that, we've been really impressed. We've been able to, sometimes our load is we have, 30 people on the system all querying different things. So, 30 warehouses spun up against the same, core data, and so we really, the limitations has not really been a problem for us.
Excellent. And maybe we'll wrap up as we are at the half-hour mark on this final question, which was, what was it about Snowflake that gave you guys the confidence to use this as your first cloud solution?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for us, it really was that initial weekend, and I mean, and when I talk about a weekend, it literally was. We got the credentials on a Friday, and Monday morning, I had my data scientists actually doing things. That was the thing that said there is actually something here, and so that hands-on, not reading the literature, not not talking to other customers, but seeing how it worked with our data, and being able to to load several months worth of data up without really any expertise in it. That was the initial thing, and then every time from then on, when we had questions or problems or growing pains or anything else, we were always able to find an answer, and that that gave us the confidence to continue.
That's so great to hear. Well, thank you everyone for joining Iovation's office hours. We look forward to seeing you on the next one, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.